All right. Welcome, everyone, to our conversation today. I am really excited to talk with you today about some of both of our experiences in the prenatal and postpartum phase. We're going to be highlighting a bit of just how unprepared a lot of people feel, both our own personal experiences and how we enter parenting with this kind of glowy view of what it might be like. And so I'm going to let Mal introduce herself today, and then we're going to just like jump right in.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited. I'm also nervous, but it's a good nervous. My name is Mal Schmitz, and I am the mother of a beautiful 7-year-old daughter. I am a wife, and I'm also a high school teacher. My wheelhouse is psychology and just all things psychology. Particularly, though, one of my favorite classes is my developmental psych, where we basically look at what's going on developmentally throughout our lifespan. And I'm very much right now in the thick of our prenatal and pregnancy unit. So I feel like this fits in perfectly.
That's so good. It's right top of mind. Um,
Yes.
so right before the recording, I actually said to you, you're probably one of the first points of contact for this conversation outside of
Yeah,
their own parents or outside
for
of
sure.
some of those cousins or whoever who might be older than
Yeah.
high schoolers having kids. And so, um, what is that like?
Well, so it's interesting in all ways. Anytime you're dealing with teenagers, I just feel like the conversation is always interesting, but particularly about this because they really have no idea. And I mean, don't get me wrong, even as I was entering this world myself, I also probably had no idea, but they are just like why would they know? Like why would they know really other than what they've maybe heard from parents or like you said somebody who's a little bit older, whether it's a sibling, and then also what they see on TV. And so they come in with these ideas that first of all, I think pregnancy is blissful. And like it can be. I don't ever want it to be like it's an awful experience. And that's something that I say to them like this isn't, my whole message isn't to terrify you, or to make you feel like you never ever want to experience this, but it's real. And like the real for a lot of people isn't, you know, I don't know, like prancing through a field of wildflowers with like a flower crown, and you are just like got the rainbows and butterflies and like your beautiful belly. And I'm like, it's misshapen, it's moving. Like there's lots of things that are just not rainbows and butterflies, I feel. And while it's great in its own way, there's just a lot of things that, they don't have right at that point. And I also feel like conversations that they may have had with parents or a sibling, I feel like we censor that a
Oh.
lot and we tend to not give the real. And so
We even censor that amongst adults,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely. When I first
Yeah.
started teaching this, I was just like, yep, so like we go to the hospital and like, oh, and then she was here and like now things are great. And then there was a part where I was like, I don't want to stand in front of my kids and lie. Like I don't want to lie to them. Um, I don't want to make it seem horrific, but like this is what can happen. And I have people come in and we share our stories and we're all very, open, but also careful to say, like, this isn't necessarily everybody's experience. This was just my experience. But I think the more we have these conversations, the more we're realizing that, like, this experience of mine is quite similar to things that like you have also experienced, and it's so far from the dancing in the wildflowers with the flower crown and the rainbow and butterflies. And so I started really embracing that, like, you know what, our journey to having our daughter Willow wasn't awesome. The labor and delivery part wasn't awesome either, and you know what, there was a lot of things in the postpartum that was not awesome either. And I felt, I often feel like my teaching uh, gives me the grace to embrace the realities of what's going on in my life, essentially, because I teach psychology. There's a lot of things that like I say out loud, and then I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm giving myself permission to like step into the realities of this. And so once I stopped saying like yes, and then we went to the hospital and eventually she was here and everything was great, I really started to embrace that like this is the story that brought our daughter into our lives, and it wasn't easy, and there were lots of things that were going on that were challenging, but we made it through. And I feel like that's something that, you know, is going to be a message that we carry with us. Like it's not always easy and it's not always perfect. It's never perfect, in fact, but like we get through it, and we find ways that work for us. And I feel like that starts with this conversation about like, you know, this is what we were getting into, and like we didn't even know. We read all of the books, I did the prenatal classes, and yet like I told my students the other day, I was a really good student. Like I've always been a really good student. I did my homework and I read all of the books and I Googled all of the things, and yet nothing prepared me for what happened
Right.
in that moment and then afterward. And so I think it's shocking to them, but like in a good way. In my heart, I feel their takeaways hopefully are things that truly will resonate with them. Maybe not now, but in the future, like I really hope that they're like, oh, Miss Schmitz said this like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Like that would just like, that would be the greatest thing. I don't have any students at this point since I've started teaching this that like have had children yet. They're still in university and like doing their thing. But I'm like, I honestly hope that like there's a few times where I'm like, if you take away anything, remember this. And you know, it's funny to like see them legitimately like write things down. Like I told them the other day when we were going to the hospital, before we went to the hospital, sorry, I was at home and like labor had just very slowly started, and we packed like snacks. Like we literally had a cooler bag, and I was like, if you take away anything from this class, bring snacks, because like as a partner or a support person, it's a really long time for you there. And while, you know, maybe most partners or support people are not like it's about me, but for a person who's in labor, we are very much in like fight or flight mode. And so we don't think about time, and we don't think about like our hunger or like how long it's been since we've slept. Like I just feel like we're in it and we're just like doing the thing. But for the person who's not in crisis mode, essentially, time is going very slowly, and like all of those like regular bodily things are happening. They're hungry, they probably have to pee, and like all of these things are going on. So I'm like, pack snacks and like eat them, like make sure that you like you're feeding yourself, because you're not in the same mode that we're in. And so like I don't ever remember feeling hungry until well after she had arrived. I don't really remember ever feeling tired until like the next day, essentially. But like my husband was trying so hard to like stay awake and like not say anything about, I'm like, I haven't eaten for 20 hours or something
I haven't
like
gone to the
that.
bathroom
Right,
or like,
exactly. And like they're just there supporting, and that's fantastic. But I'm like, you know what? Like you're going to be a way better support person if you're fed and watered,
yeah.
like most of us would. So I'm like, pack snacks. And I watched a couple of my male students like write down like bring snacks, and I'm like, you know what, if that's their takeaway 10-15 years from now, Miss Schmitz told me in my grade 12 class to pack a cooler, then like I hope that that is something that they remember. Like it's those little bits of reality where I'm like, you know, it's great if you remember what's going on factually, developmentally at each stage, but I'm hoping it's the like the realism and like this is a lived experience, and like that's something to remember, or that's something to carry with you. Like those are the things that I hope they take along.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such an interesting space. It's like an interesting liminal space for you to be in as
Yeah,
you like you have this lived experience of being a parent, which not all teachers would have that lived
for
experience.
sure. Yeah.
And you also have this really unique story that you've kind of like reckoned with in order
Hmm.
to be able to share it, because not
Yes.
everybody would stand up at the front of the room and think to themselves, I don't think I'm being very truthful in this moment, or I
Yeah.
think I'm censoring part of this. And
Yes.
I think that's a huge part of something that I use in my practice a lot as like kind of like a guiding principle is
Hmm.
the idea of radical self-responsibility. And so when we think about radical self-responsibility, the Cliff Notes version, the non-therapy speak version,
Yeah.
like I'm responsible for me and you are responsible for you.
Hmm.
And so in this westernized culture that we live in, those circles are often very blurry. And
Yeah.
they're very blurry in the sense of, what if I tell my authentic truth, still with tact and still
Hmm.
reading the room,
Yes.
and that triggers somebody else? Somehow that's my fault.
Yes. Hmm.
Right? When you say your authentic truth without tact and without reading
Hmm.
the room, that's another discussion altogether.
For sure.
Like,
Yes.
I was pregnant with my second, and I was leading a retreat, and I was very like, the retreat was in May and I was due at the end of June.
Okay.
So I was
Yes.
like very pregnant at this
Hmm.
point, probably like to the point where some of the older women who were there were probably very scared for me to be that far away from home,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yes. Yeah.
and so anyway, we were at this retreat, and this woman whose kids were older, like grown adults.
Yeah.
She was like, "Yeah, I like broke my hip in labor," or she had some like really
Mhm.
horrible
Yeah.
experience,
Wild
right?
story.
And I didn't really react to it, and I was just like, "Okay, that's your story." And she was
Yes.
like, "Oh wow, I really thought that story would scare you." And I was like, "Pardon me?"
Right?
Like, were you, and this is like so like such an isolated experience, right?
Yes. Yes.
It was like, I couldn't help but wonder in that moment, without tact and without
Yeah.
reading the room, because maybe she's not healed that part of herself. Maybe she's not ever said
Right.
it out loud like that
Yeah.
before. I don't know. But like, there was a part of me that was like, are you saying this out of a place of fear, not out of a place of love, right?
Right.
So that's like kind of my gauge, is like, am I sharing this in terms of
Mm.
your thing about I don't want to terrify you, but am I
Yes.
sharing this from a place of love and care
Yes.
and concern with
Yeah.
tact and reading the room?
Hmm.
Or am I sharing this from a place of fear, where
Right.
in my body, this experience of a traumatic birth, of
Hmm.
a horrible postpartum experience, like,
Yes.
am I sharing that with another human from a place of fear, or am I sharing it
Mhm.
from a place of love because I truly believe that they need
Yes.
to know the reality of the
Yeah.
situation, right?
I love that. Like that's yes, I love that because you're absolutely right. While I put out this precursor that like I'm not trying to terrify you, and I'm not, but it very much is coming from I wish that my developmental class did this, like I took this class in high school and we made like a baby book, which was fun and creative,
Yeah.
but like I feel like that was the first moment when I was 16, 17 years old where I'm like, this is the expectation. I got a scrapbook now as a parent because that's what they taught me to do in high school. And like, we're not scrapbooking. Like they might prefer that, some of them, but I'm like, this is what we're doing is we're going to talk and we're going to reflect. And my favorite part is so they listen to these three stories. We take the notes. We are going to, this next week, we're talking about postpartum and what's kind of, going on there because I talk about, you know, pregnancy is one thing. And I still feel like, there's, you can't ever control what's going on. I feel really in your body, but at least there's like some sense of containment, I feel. And then they're here and they send you home. And now you're like, what do I what do I do? Like, what do I do? Like, again, read all the books. I was on babycentral.com like 24/7. And like, what do I do? Like, how do I make this work now in my home with my husband, like, how do we do this? And again, I feel like it probably gets to a scarier place. It's not rainbows and butterflies, and we're very real about, like, I feel like me and my husband were two different people living out this like world with this little being, but I'm like, we weren't the same people that we were 2 weeks prior, like our relationship was very different for some time because we were both like, what is happening? Like, what do we do with this little 6 pound, 20-inch thing? Like, how has this changed our entire world and being? And like, it does in a great way. But again, I feel like that first little bit when I had no idea what I was doing, like, it was not great. And I feel, again, this is like the type A teacher, and not to be like, I'm so amazing, but I'm like, there's very few things that I can put my mind to and like don't do well, because that's just like, if I want to teach this concept, I'm going to literally teach it the best way I can, and it was like, okay, I went in and was like, I can do this, like, I can do this. I'm a teacher, like, I know how to be around kids. But she's not a kid, like, she was
Right.
a newborn, like, she's an infant, and there's really no teaching them. Like, I can't, like, there's just you're to their schedule doing you're just in their world living it, I feel. And it was a
Yes.
very weird reality. And because my husband is also a teacher, you have that personality times two. And again, like, we both just like set our minds to things and like we'll get it done. Like, this is why we're a great team at work together as well. But I wouldn't say for the first little bit we were a great team, and I think that's going to be a weird reality for my students as well, because they see us both, like, we're at the same school, they've had both of us. And I have had students that are like, you and Mr. Schmitz are just like couple goals, and like, it's all cute, like, that's how they speak, right? Is everybody's like couple goal, or like whatever they call it, couple goals, I think is still a thing. And I think it's going to be weird for them to hear next week that, in that first couple of weeks of bringing our child home, that like we weren't couple goals. And I don't know what couple goals are,
I don't know what I meant. Like, what are couple
especially in
goals?
that time.
What are
Yeah.
couple goals in the first 12 weeks?
Yeah, in general, right?
In general, are like, I think, like kindness, like just like a bare minimum.
I think,
Of
you know
like,
what, for like a high school relationship, they're like, you guys talk to each other. You speak to one another,
yeah,
actually, not like on text. Like, that's
it's like,
probably where like their baseline.
yeah. And like couple, because I teach this stuff,
Yeah.
as a social worker, I have developed once already, but I'm revamping it now. A course for the social, emotional, and mental health changes that happen
Mm-hmm.
in in the perinatal spectrum, right? So from
Yeah.
pregnancy to postpartum.
Yeah.
And so that's 2 years of life if you think
Yes.
about it, right?
Yes.
Or more, depending on the fertility journey that a particular person
Right.
has gone on. So
Yes.
pregnant for not 9 months, 10 months, like,
Yep.
there's a big misconception around that. It's not
Yep.
nine.
We talk about that as well.
You go to the end of the ninth month,
Of
which is 10.
yes. Yes.
And then
Yes.
and 12 months of postpartum,
Yeah.
being the first 12 weeks, is coined, for anybody who doesn't know, is coined like the fourth trimester. Like, you have first three,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's still the fourth trimester, where
Yeah.
there are like some developmental markers in that phase that
Mm-hmm.
are not often talked about. Like, your
Right.
baby doesn't even recognize that they are outside of you
Mm-hmm.
until they are about 4 months old. Like,
Yeah.
which is why we have, as a society, shifted, in my opinion, not enough, but
Mm-hmm.
shifted to having carriers, and to really integrating some of that non-Western knowledge that can
Yes.
come from raising babies. I have a friend right now who just had her baby a couple weeks ago. I think she's maybe 8 weeks old, between 8 and
Mm-hmm.
12.
Yeah.
And she just said to me, like, none of the Western sleeping stuff is what I grew up with. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
not, um, so we were having this like really open conversation about how sleep is really westernized,
Oh gosh, yeah.
and how much information people, humans, consume about sleep hygiene, and
Oh yeah.
especially about newborn sleep. And so there's like these developmental markers that happen in the fourth trimester that even if they were told to me in pregnancy, I'm not sure that I would have been in a place to hear it. Like,
No,
you
probably
mean that
not.
I have to go from sleeping like 12 hours a day on the
Mm-hmm.
weekends, like when I don't have to be at work, like I am not getting out of bed as a pregnant person.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm already tired and I'm already
Mm-hmm.
this and I'm already that. And now you're telling me that quite seriously, I need to be ready for my baby to be awake every 45 minutes, regardless
Right.
of if it's day or night. Like,
Yes.
I would have just been like, you can keep that shit to yourself. Like,
Yes. Yeah, don't bring that around here.
no, don't do that. Like,
No,
you're totally
exactly.
bursting my vision of the galloping in a wildflower field
With the
and like
flower crown.
with my flower crown on.
Yes.
Like, and so these realities of postpartum is something
Mm-hmm.
that I teach adults. You're teaching it to the high school people.
Yes. Yeah.
And I am teaching it to adults who are now pregnant. They can't take it back.
In it.
At
Yes.
this
They're in
moment,
it.
they're in
Yeah.
it. And
Mm-hmm.
and so the idea of what's to come can be very scary. It is.
Absolutely.
The truth is scary. I mean, and at first, that quote is a quote for a reason. It will piss you off, but
Yes.
then it will set you free. Like,
Absolutely.
and so these relationship goals that your high schoolers are talking about, in my opinion, is that like, well, circling it back to like that personal responsibility is that
Yeah.
like the birthing person is
Yeah.
responsible for them and the
Mm-hmm.
infant for a
And the
time. Like
yes.
there is a very, like I said, they don't even identify that they're outside of your body.
Mm-hmm.
And your partner is responsible for everything else.
Yep.
Everything.
Yes.
The garbages, the dishes, the food, getting the
Yep.
food, bringing the food to the house, cooking the food, cleaning the pubes off of the toilet, all of the things,
All of the things. Yeah.
all of the things that have, if research shows us anything, all of the
Mm-hmm.
things that the birthing person has probably taken responsibility for up until that point.
Mm-hmm.
Where we just we are gendered in very predictable ways. And
For sure.
I
Yes.
applaud anybody who has already broken through some of those gender
Mm-hmm.
conditionings by the time they're pregnant. That is like, you get all the gold stars for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the people who haven't, who have found themselves in these default gendered
Mm-hmm.
roles, is that what happens because of Western gendered conditioning around what a mother is or what a father
Mm-hmm.
is or what the birthing person
Mm-hmm.
is that you have not taken anything off of your plate. You
No.
have only added a baby.
Correct.
And
Only.
so for me, couple
Yeah.
goals in the fourth trimester is that anything that the birthing person can do,
Yeah.
the other partner can do, except
Yeah.
for if you choose to and strive to breastfeed. That is
Right.
like, or chest feed. That is the
Yeah.
only piece that comes with the birthing person.
For sure.
Literally everything else is the partner, which I have a real soft spot for partners.
Mm-hmm.
My partner didn't struggle as much with our first, but really struggled with the transition to having two kids.
Yeah.
Because we were in this like nice sweet spot. My oldest was 4 when we had our second. So he was in this,
Mm-hmm.
like, he wasn't a toddler anymore. We could reason with him.
Yep.
He could like get his coat and his boots on all by himself.
Yes. Yeah.
And so there was like this liminal space. And then we add this
Mm-hmm.
totally useless potato sack to the mix. And that,
That needs you for everything.
please
Yeah.
don't equate that for not loving him. I absolutely love him, but that's just
Of
babies are
course. Yes.
have you seen how other animals act? 3 days after birth, they can friggin' walk.
Yes, they're just flying already.
Right? Survival.
You're still laying here.
Survival.
Yeah.
And so he really struggled with his second. So I have a real
Mhm.
soft spot for partners, because not only has, up until that point, research is going to show us that the
Mhm.
birthing person or the woman going to have taken on the majority of the research, the majority of the sign up for classes.
Mm.
She in most instances are going to be watching birth videos before she falls asleep every night.
Yep.
They are going to be already on the radar for daycare and having conversations with their other birthing people, friends, and the partners. There's nothing.
Yeah.
And they haven't been conditioned to know what to even do.
Well, and that's just it, like, again, I think there's a lot of unknown for both sides. Like, you have no idea, period, what your role is or what your role is until you're just kind of, again, in it, like, until you're in it. And it just, I think for a lot of people, it seems like too late, right? Like it's like we're figuring this out while we're doing this, and it just doesn't seem proactive, like, I think a lot of people don't like living in reactive land. But again, I think you could figure out all of the, like, you could establish all of the roles and you could still do all of the things and read all of the things, but until they're there and you're living it, like, it's like a lesson plan, like, it's like or a birth plan, like, I can sit down without knowing my class and knowing their, individual needs and how they function together as a whole. And I could sit this down and plan this out in the perfect way for me. And I could run that plan. But, like, they all have different personalities and they're going to take this understanding in different ways, which is the beauty, I feel, of it. Is like, sometimes the unknown is like the great stuff. I teach this several times a semester, and after every presentation, are there any questions? And sometimes there's none. Sometimes they're like very, like, we get the same kind of question every time. But I'm like, sometimes, like, this class that I have right now, there are questions, like, so many, like, me and my other presenters were just like, that's a really good question, and it's like, it takes the conversation in different ways that I could not have sat down and planned out my answers for, because I don't know how they're going to connect to this. And I feel like that is kind of what happens. And it doesn't feel good in the moment to be like, why are we always behind? Like, it always feels like we're behind in whatever the rules are. Like, why can't I catch up? But, like, I feel like this is something I kind of had to unlearn as a teacher as well, sitting down and doing all the planning prior to knowing my class, or prior to, knowing where this is going to take us. We talk about those teachable moments and leaving room for that. And, like, you know what, if I only got through half my plan because we had this conversation that I didn't plan for and it was unexpected, but it ended up being awesome, then, like, screw the plan, And I just feel like that is something that starts during this pregnancy journey. And it kind of carries through the rest of parenthood. Like, I would love to just have my plan for the day. And yes, this is exactly what we did and we stuck to it. But there are many moments that I have, whether it's with Ryan or my daughter, that I'm like, I couldn't plan for this because I'm not them. And so the way that they connect with things, or the conversations that we have because this thing happened, those end up being the things that we remember. And those end up being, and maybe, again, maybe it wasn't easy. We had to have this conversation and maybe it was sparked by something that wasn't fun, but, like, teachable moments. And I just feel like that is something that, again, as a teacher, I had to let go of, like, before I even was a parent, just being like, I can't sit down and plan everything and then become upset or frustrated when I'm behind in my plan, or when it didn't go the way that I thought it would go. But then I started looking at, like, okay, I didn't plan for this, but look at the great things that came from it. And again, I think when it's not necessarily scheduled and we're just, like, checking boxes off of a thing, it becomes more meaningful. Like, it is these conversations that I have with my students that's going to be their takeaway. It's not how long the embryo is, or the weight, or what, it's the size of a pumpkin seed. Like, that's not going to be what they remember. They're going to remember me saying, like, if you shit on the table while you're in labor, that's a good thing because you're using the right muscles and your baby's probably like, that's going to be what they remember.
Right?
It's going to be bring the snacks. Like, that's what they're going to remember. It's not going to be, your baby's heart at 6 weeks is starting to, maybe they'll remember that. That's a pretty big one. But like, they're not going to remember all of the like, oh, the heart is starting to divide and like all of this at this many weeks. Like, and like, I don't even know that. I need my notes to know when that happens. But I'm like, I do remember like these questions that they had and like the things that we can connect with. And again, I feel like that all goes back to like, there's just a point where we need to let go of what we think will be and just like accept and embrace what is. Like, this
Yes.
is what it is. And
Yes.
we go
Yes.
with
And
it or we
I think that's just like an amazing sentiment to close this episode on,
yeah.
is just that like you can consume all of the information. You can
Yes.
take all of the right classes. You
Yep.
can show up with snacks and you can
Be
you
the
can
best student.
you can poop on the table.
Yeah.
You can be a great student.
Yep.
And at some point
Mm-hmm.
along the journey between trying to conceive and postpartum and beyond,
Mm-hmm.
something is going to go sideways.
Yes.
Something is going to not go the way that you expected it.
Mm-hmm.
Something is not going to fill the vision of the
Mm-hmm.
wildflower crown in the field. And at some point, reality is going to hit.
Mm-hmm.
And when the reality hits, the most important part, in my opinion, as a
Mm-hmm.
social worker, is that you recognize that you have agency to respond to that. And
Mm-hmm.
so we might not be able to control how our birth goes or
Yes.
how people treat us during that time,
Yeah.
though it should be with at least kindness. And that's,
You would hope. Yeah, you would hope. You would
I've
hope.
heard lots of stories to the contrary.
Yes, same.
I would, you can't expect or know how your baby is going to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't expect or control how your partner is going to respond or how your
Mm-hmm.
mother-in-law is going to respond.
Yes.
But you have agency in those moments to decide how you are going to respond,
Yes.
how you are going to show up to the challenge.
Yep.
And all of that showing up, I know, is layered, and I can't even begin to cover the layers that
Mm-hmm.
allow us to actually have agency.
Right.
But in these moments, if anybody listening takes one thing away from this, I hope that it's from an educator and a social worker who are educating and informing two different populations of people.
Right.
That the most important thing is that you can't plan for it, but you can build yourself up and your relationship up to a place where challenges are expected.
Yeah.
And you know how to you
Yes.
might respond.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way that you respond to that is what is going to hopefully work best for you. Like you don't have to respond how so and so did, or again, like I feel like there's a lot of similarities in some stories, but yet the takeaway, like how I handled this versus how somebody else, they don't have to be the same. And I talk to my kids about like every pregnancy is different, every labor and delivery story is different, even if there are similarities. Like, how you're going to handle something isn't necessarily how the person in the next room is going to handle it or how I would handle it. And again, this goes back to like, we can't always control or plan for these things because in this moment, this is what I need to do. And sometimes we just need to do it. And it sometimes might even be a surprise to us as well. Like you, again, might sit down and be like, this is the person I am. and this is how I might respond to this. But like in that moment, that might not be how you respond to it. Like I I told my students I thought I had a really low pain tolerance, and how that would then affect my labor, because I don't want to deal with pain. I also thought I couldn't handle pain. And so again, even my understanding of what I might do in this situation was completely different than what I actually did, because I feel like I just didn't even know myself, like,
Yeah.
which is also I think a common thing in this parenting journey, is like sometimes we surprise ourselves, or often we surprise ourselves, because I think we just don't always know how we're going to respond to things or react to things until, again, like we're in it and we're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And that leads us into that we're going to be doing a part 2 to this series.
Yay.
And we're going to be moving into how each of us have kind of come up against perfectionism in parenting, and how some of that has really shaped and taken over some of our parenting experiences. So we are going to pause here and go into our next part 2, and we'll see you there.